The Jewish story. This week's story from the Holocaust is taken from the book Holocaust Journey, Travelling in Search of the Past, written by Martin Gilbert. We leave the hotel, walk through the village, past the cemetery and reach the railway. It is a beautiful, hot summer afternoon in the mountains of Slovakia. I read out a description by Arik Hirsch, who now lives in Britain, of his enforced journey to Auschwitz by rail in 1944. From the Logic Issue. He was 15 at the time. As the train progressed, it gradually grew hotter and hotter in the wagon. Little children began to cry, elderly people began to feel faint, and many people started getting desperate to go to the toilet. I was standing on a bucket looking out of the tiny window, but had to get down when one of the men asked if he could use the bucket for a makeshift toilet. He fenced off a corner of the wagon with a blanket, then put the bucket behind it. That way people could go behind the blanket and thus retain what little dignity they still had left. After a while the stench from the bucket became unbearable. However, we had to live with it, as the doors were locked and the window was too high and narrow to empty out the bucket's contents. The heat too continued to build, and little children continued to cry. We could not sit down, as the wagon was too cramped, and we were all very hungry. Fortunately, a few people had brought bottles of water with them, which they began to pass around. All at once an old woman collapsed, and within minutes was dead. Now, as well as all other problems, we had a corpse in the wagon with us. I began to pray as never before. Please God, let us reach our destination soon. My prayers, however, went unheeded. The long day dragged on and on, heading slowly towards night. Eventually one reaches a stage where one resigns oneself to a certain situation. During that long, terrible day, I believe that I reached that stage for perhaps the first time since the war had begun. I began to care little about my own fate. I just wished that this horrendous ordeal would end, one way or another. Perhaps the only thing that stopped me from giving up completely was the responsibility I felt towards Genia and her brother. Genia was nervous and trembling with fear. She had never been in a camp before and did not know what to expect. I stroked her face and held her hand, the sweat slippery between our palms. I assured her that we would be all right, that I had been in a camp before, and I was still alive. She squeezed my hand tightly, and gradually I was able to calm her down a little. Every so often I asked Henrik and Simiak to lift me up so that I could look out of the window. When the train curved, I could see the guard on the running board outside our wagon, brandishing his machine gun. I wondered how close the Russians were, whether they would ever release us from this ordeal. Most of all, I wondered where this train was taking us. At last night fell and it began to get cooler, but it also grew steadily darker until it was pitch black. We slept what we could, half standing, leaning against one another, but our sleep was punctuated by the smell of sweat and death and human waste, and by the moans and groans of the people. The darkness, like the heat, seemed to go on, a night that lasted a year. When finally dawn came, it brought very little hope. The train was still speeding on towards the destination, but where that destination was, none of us could say. We travelled a little further, and then abruptly the train began to slow down. Once again I asked Simek and Henrik to lift me up to the window so that I could see what was going on. The sight that met my eyes was what I had been expecting, yet my spirits plummeted all the same. I saw a camp, barracks, high wire fencing, guards in towers, people walking about in striped suits. The train slowed down gradually and then came to a stop. After a journey that had seemed to go on forever and ever, we had finally arrived at our destination. We waited a further 10 minutes, then we heard German voices, the noise of the doors being pulled open. Please pass on this story.